A cramped room in occupied Paris, 1943. A woman sits alone with a wireless radio, headphones pressed against her ears. Through the window, a German truck idles on the cobblestone street, engine running far too long. She knows what that means. Direction-finding vans. They're hunting for transmitters, hunting for her. She should stop, pack up, run. Instead, she taps out another message. Her name is Noor Inayat Khan. She's 29 years old, and the message she's sending contains troop movements that will redirect Allied supply drops and cripple German logistics across northern France. If she stops now, Paris loses its only voice to London. That silence would cost hundreds of lives. So she keeps transmitting, even as the van pulls closer. By the time she finally escapes, barefoot, palms bleeding, wireless set clutched to her chest, London has already drawn a line through her name. They think she's dead. She's been presumed compromised, her transmissions dismissed as enemy deception. Noor will send messages for months more. No one knows the exact count. When the Gestapo finally catches her, they'll find a woman who escaped capture twice, who walked back into prison to protect other agents, who refused to transmit even under torture. This is the story of a woman who was not temperamentally suited for field work, a pacifist who became Paris's last wireless operator, a spy who kept transmitting after her own headquarters stopped listening, a woman who chose silence over betrayal and saved lives she would never meet. Noor Inayat Khan was born on January 1, 1914 in Moscow, raised on poetry, music, and Sufi teachings of nonviolence. Her childhood was anything but ordinary. Her family moved constantly, Moscow to London to Paris. Her father was a musician and mystic. Her mother believed that beauty and kindness could transform the world. Before the war, Noor wrote children's stories. She taught music. She hated conflict so deeply that her instructors worried she'd break under pressure. Her mother had taught her one lesson. Kindness is not weakness. Gentleness is not surrender. When you see suffering, you don't turn away, you act. It was a lesson she would never forget. June 17, 1943. Britain flew Noor into occupied France aboard a Lysander aircraft. She landed using the code name Madeleine and a false identity, Jean-Marie Renier. She was 29. The occupation had been suffocating Paris for 3 years. German soldiers filled the cafes. Nazi flags hung from the Eiffel Tower. New rules, new restrictions, new disappearances. Noor remembered what it felt like later. You could hear the boots on the cobblestones at night, the sound of engines stopping outside safe houses. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. But the British didn't send Noor to hide. They sent her to transmit. That night she'd move through the city with her wireless set, unpacking and repacking it in attics, basements, abandoned apartments. German vans prowled the streets, their antennas rotating slowly, hunting for radio signals. Wireless operators whispered among themselves, 6 weeks. That's how long you live. Noor would last far longer. But she was never supposed to survive what came next. Before we continue with Noor's story, I need to ask you something. The Gestapo who hunted her, the officers who tortured prisoners for information, who executed women for the crime of sending messages, who turned Paris into a city of whispers and fear. They believed they'd won. They believed courage could be broken with enough cruelty. If you think they were wrong, if you believe that one woman with a radio could matter more than an entire occupation force, hit that subscribe button right now. Every like, every subscription tells us you want more stories like this. Stories about ordinary people who refused to let evil win. And drop a comment below, where are you watching from? Because Noor's story isn't just about Paris in 1943. It's about what we do when darkness surrounds us. I want to know where in the world that message is reaching today. Now let's talk about what happened when the Gestapo finally came for her. Noor Inayat Khan shouldn't have been anywhere near a war. She was born in Moscow on New Year's Day, 1914, the daughter of an Indian Sufi mystic and an American mother who believed beauty could heal the world. Her father, Inayat Khan, taught music and spiritual philosophy. Her mother, Aura Ray Baker, filled their home with art, poetry, and the belief that kindness was the highest form of strength. They moved constantly, Moscow to London to Paris, always chasing her father's teaching work, always rebuilding home in new places. Noor learned early that home wasn't a location. It was the people you carried with you, the stories you told, the music you made together. By the time she was a teenager, Paris had become that home. She loved the city in a way that only transplants can. Fiercely, gratefully, she'd walk along the Seine with notebooks full of children's stories. She'd practice her harp in their small apartment until neighbors complained. She dreamed of becoming a writer, of creating fairy tales that would teach children about courage and compassion without ever mentioning war. Her father had taught her one central principle, ahimsa, nonviolence, the refusal to cause harm, even to those who wish you harm. Noor believed it completely. She flinched during arguments. She cried when she saw animals hurt. Her instructors would later note that she lacked the temperament for conflict. They meant it as a criticism. She wore it as identity. Then May 10th, 1940 arrived. Nazi Germany invaded France. The battle lasted 6 weeks. Paris fell without a shot, fired, declared an open city to avoid destruction. German soldiers marched down the Champs-Élysées, while Parisians watched in silence. Noor was 26 years old. She watched the occupation settle over her city like frost. New rules, new flags, new fears. Jewish families began disappearing. Resistance members were shot in public squares as warnings. The France she loved was being suffocated. And kindness, beautiful, gentle kindness, wasn't saving anyone. Noor had spent her entire life believing that peace was the answer to violence, that love could disarm hatred, that stories and music could change hearts. She still believed it, but she also understood with a clarity that broke something in her, that sometimes you have to fight for peace. Sometimes refusing to act is its own form of violence. So in 1940, Noor Inayat Khan, pacifist, storyteller, the girl who cried over wounded birds, made a decision. She joined the war, not out of hatred, not out of anger, out of duty to the people who couldn't fight for themselves. The woman who hated violence was about to become one of Britain's most dangerous weapons. The Women's Auxiliary Air Force didn't know what to do with Noor Inayat Khan. She joined in November 1940, driven by something she couldn't quite name. Not patriotism, not exactly, not revenge, more like responsibility. The occupation was strangling France, and sitting still felt like complicity. So she signed up, and immediately proved everyone's worst fears. During wireless training, she forgot codes mid-transmission. Her fingers would freeze over the Morse key, her mind going blank under pressure. During weapons drills, she hesitated, visible, damning hesitation, before firing. Other recruits moved with confidence. Noor moved like someone apologizing for taking up space. Her instructors noticed. One report, filed in early 1941, described her as temperamentally unsuited for field work. Another noted she was too emotional, not sufficiently ruthless. A third simply stated, lacks the killer instinct necessary for this work. They weren't wrong, nor knew she didn't belong here. She'd watch other trainees, women who could switch off empathy like a light, who could lie without flinching, who treated violence as a tool rather than a tragedy, and feel the gap between them widen. But she didn't quit. Not because she believed she'd succeed, not because she thought she was brave, because the alternative was doing nothing, and doing nothing while people died felt worse than failing. By 1943, Britain's desperation had become impossible to hide. The Special Operations Executive, the spy network running agents into occupied Europe, was hemorrhaging operatives. Paris was particularly brutal. Wireless operators were being arrested faster than they could be replaced. Safe houses were compromised. Networks collapsed overnight. The average life expectancy for a radio operator in France, 6 weeks. SOE needed bodies. They needed anyone who could work a wireless set and wouldn't immediately break under interrogation. Standards dropped. Noor's file was pulled from the rejection pile. She was given a choice: stay in London as a radio trainer, safe but useless, or volunteer for occupied France, knowing she'd probably die there. She didn't hesitate this time. June 17, 1943, RAF Tangmere Airfield. A small black-painted Lysander aircraft sat on the runway, engine humming in the darkness. Noor climbed aboard with 3 other agents, her wireless set packed in a suitcase, her false papers identifying her as Jean-Marie Renier. A handler gave her final instructions through the open cockpit. Someone nearby, another agent, maybe a pilot, muttered just loud enough to hear, 6 weeks, that's how long they live. Noor pulled on her headset. The Lysander lifted into the night. Below, the English Channel disappeared into blackness. Ahead, somewhere in that darkness, occupied France was waiting. She was 29 years old. She was not temperamentally suited for field work, and she was about to become Paris's last hope. The Lysander touched down in a dark field south of Paris just after midnight. Noor hit the ground running, literally. The plane stayed on French soil for less than 90 seconds. By the time she reached the tree line, it was already lifting back into the night, disappearing toward England like it had never existed. She was alone in occupied France. Codename, Madeleine. Cover identity, Jean-Marie Renier, a children's nurse. Wireless set, hidden in a suitcase beneath clothing and sheet music. Life expectancy, 6 weeks, starting now. The first contact came the next morning. A woman in a cafe who ordered coffee with too much sugar, the prearranged signal. They spoke in careful code, addresses, drop points, safe houses scattered across Paris, where Noor could transmit without staying long enough to be traced. For 3 days, it almost felt manageable. Then the arrests began. First, a contact missed a scheduled meeting, then another. Safe houses that had been active for months suddenly went dark. Curtains drawn, doors locked, neighbors whispering about midnight arrests. One by one, the radios fell silent. By day 6, Noor understood the truth with horrifying clarity. The network had collapsed. She was the only wireless operator left in Paris. The message from London came through on June 25th, 8 days after her arrival. Extract immediately. Network compromised. Return first available. Noor sat in a cramped attic in Montmartre, staring at the decoded words until they blurred. If she left, Paris would lose its only voice to London. No way to coordinate supply drops. No way to warn of raids or troop movements. No way to tell anyone that people were still fighting here, still resisting, still refusing to surrender. Silence would mean death, for agents, for resistance members, for the ordinary people hiding Jews and distributing pamphlets and sabotaging rail lines. Her instructor's words echoed in her head, not temperamentally suited for field work. They were right. She wasn't suited for this. Her hands were shaking, her stomach twisted with fear. Every sound outside made her freeze. But she was all Paris had. Noor encoded her response carefully, checking it twice before transmitting. Staying. Paris needs operator. Will continue transmission. She sent it before she could change her mind. Then she closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. 6 weeks. The clock was running, but she wasn't leaving. What Noor didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that London had stopped believing in her. Her file stamped in red ink. Presumed compromised. Some analysts suspected she'd been captured, her radio turned by the Gestapo. Others thought she was already dead, her transmissions fabricated by German intelligence to lure more agents into traps. A few still argued she might be legitimate. But the doubt was enough. Someone in headquarters drew a line through her code name. Madeleine was gone. She kept sending anyway. Night after night, she moved through Paris like a ghost, unpacking her wireless set in attics, basements, abandoned apartments. Never the same location twice. The ritual became muscle memory. Find the spot, set up the antenna, tune the frequency, listen for static to clear, transmit. Then pack everything up and disappear before the vans arrived, because they always came. German direction-finding vans prowled the streets with rotating antennas, triangulating radio signals. They were patient, methodical. The longer you transmitted, the closer they got. Noor learned to work in bursts, 10 minutes, maybe 15 if the message was critical. Then out, fast. Once, transmitting near Montmartre, she saw them pull up outside. She didn't stop. The message contained troop movements, German reinforcements heading toward Normandy, supply routes through northern France, logistics that could redirect Allied operations and save hundreds of lives. Her hands stayed steady on the Morse key, even as boots hit the pavement below. She finished the transmission. 30 seconds later, fists pounded on the building's entrance. She went through the window barefoot, the wireless set clutched against her chest, her palms tearing on brick as she scrambled across rooftops. Behind her, German voices shouted, flashlights cut through the darkness. She dropped into an alley, kept running, didn't stop until her lungs burned and her feet bled. The message got through. Allied command, rerouted supply drops based on her intelligence. German logistics across northern France were disrupted for weeks. Resistance cells received weapons and explosives they desperately needed. Lives were saved. In London. A radio operator receiving her transmission. An officer read the decoded message, then checked her file. The red stamp, presumed compromised. The message is filed away, marked unverified. Noor never knew if anyone was listening. She never knew London thought she was dead. She transmitted anyway, because Paris needed a voice, and ghosts apparently could still speak. October 16, 1943. The betrayal came from a man named Henri Dericourt. Not directly, but through a contact he'd compromised. A resistance courier, a father of 2. The Gestapo had shown him photographs, a schoolyard, his children playing. 2 small faces circled in red pen. They promised him the children would be safe. They promised deportation wouldn't touch his family. They promised mercy if he gave. Them one name, just one. He gave them Noor. She knew before they came. The way information traveled through the resistance, whispers, coded warnings, the sudden absence of familiar faces, told her everything. A contact had been compromised, Names were being given up. Hers was likely among them. She could have run. She had maybe an hour, maybe less. Instead, she kept transmitting. One last message, coordinates for a supply drop, instructions for remaining cells, a warning about Gestapo movements near Lyon. She finished the transmission just as Boots hit the stairs. They came at dawn, 5 men, weapons drawn, shouting in German and broken French. Nor didn't resist. She stood slowly, hands visible, trying to stay calm even as they threw her against the wall. One agent smashed the wireless set with his boot. Another searched the room, tearing through papers, looking for codes, names, anything. They demanded to know who else was in the network. She said nothing. They asked again, louder, angrier. Still nothing. One agent grabbed her by the hair, forced her to look at him. "Who sent you?" Nor met his eyes. Silence. They threw her into the back of a military truck. No handcuffs yet. Those would come later. Just rough hands and shouted orders. As the truck pulled away, Noor looked back at the building one last time. She thought about the man who gave her name, his children, the photographs circled in red. She didn't curse him. She didn't scream his name or vow revenge. She understood. That understanding hurt worse than the arrest, worse than the bruises forming on her arms, worse than knowing what came next. Because if she'd had children, if someone had shown her their faces and threatened their lives, would she have done differently? At the Gestapo headquarters, 84 Avenue Foch, the interrogation wing. Noor was led inside. The interrogation would begin within hours. They would demand codes, schedules, names. She would give them nothing. But the torture, brutal, methodical, designed to break her, would turn out not to be the worst part. What came after would be far crueler. The interrogations began immediately. Gestapo headquarters, 84 Avenue Foch. A room with no windows, a single chair bolted to the floor. Men in uniforms asking the same questions over and over for hours. "Who is your contact in London?" Silence. "Where are the other operators?" Silence. "Give us the codes." Silence. When questions didn't work, they used fists. Then worse. Noor endured it the way she endured everything, by retreating somewhere inside herself where their violence couldn't reach. They threw her into solitary confinement, a cell barely large enough to lie down in. No light, no human contact, just darkness and the echo of her own breathing. She recited poetry aloud to remember her own voice. Rumi, Tagore, verses her father had taught her as a child. When she ran out of poems, she made up stories, children's tales about brave princesses and impossible journeys, and told them to the walls. It kept her human. The first escape attempt failed quickly. She'd picked the lock on her cell door using a piece of wire, made it halfway down a corridor before guards caught her. They beat her, shackled her tighter, put her back in the cell. She tried again 3 weeks later. This time she made it farther, through the corridor, past a guard station, empty, miraculously empty, down a stairwell, a door, cool night air hitting her face. Freedom, she froze. Her mind raced through the implications. If she escaped, the Germans would know she'd survived interrogation without breaking. They'd know she hadn't given up codes, contacts, or intelligence. They'd realize the network might still be intact. They'd retaliate. Public executions, hostages shot in reprisal, resistance members rounded up and killed to prove a point. Her freedom would cost dozens of lives, maybe hundreds. Noor stood there for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then she turned around, walked back inside, closed the door behind her. They never understood what happened. They thought she'd gotten lost, panicked, failed. They didn't realize she'd chosen to come back, that she'd held freedom in her hands and set it down deliberately, carefully, because other people's lives mattered more than her own survival. The guards shackled her wrists and ankles after that. Chains attached to the wall. No more escape attempts. Nor didn't fight them. She'd made her choice. Freedom wasn't worth the cost. So she stayed and waited and prayed that someone, somewhere, would remember she'd existed. They brought the wireless set into her cell in November 1943, the same model she'd used, the same frequency settings, even the same worn leather case. A Gestapo officer sat across from her, smiling. "You're going to transmit for us now." Noor said nothing. "We have your codes, your schedule, your call signs. London is still listening for Madeline." He leaned forward. "You can make this easy. Send messages for us. Tell them the network is intact. Lure more agents into France." She stared at the wireless set. Her hands, the same hands that had sent hundreds of messages, that had kept Paris connected, that had saved lives she'd never know about, stayed motionless in her lap. "Or," the officer continued, "we transmit without you. We've studied your rhythm, your cadence, your mistakes. We can mimic you well enough." They did it anyway. For weeks, fake messages went out under her code name, instructions for new agents, coordinates for landing sites that led straight into German ambushes, supply drops redirected to Gestapo hands. London received them, analyzed them, nearly responded. But something was wrong. Experienced radio operators developed signatures, tiny quirks in timing, spacing, rhythm, like handwriting, but in Morse code. London's analysts noticed the transmissions were technically perfect, too perfect. Noor always made small errors under pressure. A stuttered pause, a corrected letter. The new transmissions had none. They were mechanical, flawless. Suspicion grew. The Gestapo tried for 3 months. They brought Noor to the radio room repeatedly, demanded she transmit, threatened her, hurt her. She never touched the keys, not once. Her silence became the loudest message she ever sent. By refusing to transmit, by choosing pain over cooperation, she saved agents she would never meet, prevented traps she would never know about, protected a network that had already written her off as dead. Her suffering had no visible payoff, no dramatic rescue, no grateful survivors, no moment where someone looked her in the eyes and said, "You saved us." Just silence, and the cold certainty that silence was the only weapon she had left. In September 1944, the war was turning. Allied forces pushed east through France. Paris was liberated. The resistance emerged from shadows. The Germans began erasing evidence. Prisoners who knew too much. Witnesses who could testify. Liabilities. Noor's transfer order came through on September 11th. Destination: Dachau concentration camp. Category: Nacht und Nebel, night and fog. Prisoners designated for disappearance. No records, no trial, no trace. She weighed almost nothing. Her wrists were raw from chains. She could barely stand, and they still feared her silence. Dachau concentration camp, September 1944. Noor Inayat Khan arrived weighing less than 90 pounds, shackled at the wrists and ankles, hair matted, skin stretched over bone. The guards still marked her file. Highly dangerous. Nacht und Nebel, night and fog. The designation for prisoners meant to vanish without trace. She'd spent nearly a year in captivity, interrogation, solitary confinement, torture, starvation, and through it all, silence. They'd broken her body. They never broke her voice. September 13th, 1944. No trial, no final interrogation, no ceremony, just a yard, a wall, 4 women who'd refused to cooperate. Noor was led out in chains. She could barely walk. 2 guards supported her by the arms, not out of mercy, but because she couldn't stand on her own. The other 3 women stood straight despite their exhaustion. Noor tried to do the same. In her final moments, Noor thought about the message she'd tried to send before her capture. Intelligence about troop movements, warnings about compromised safe houses, names of collaborators, information that could have redirected agents, saved time, spared lives. It had been swallowed by atmospheric interference and distance. She died believing it never got through, believing she'd failed. When the shots were fired, witnesses later reported that Noor spoke one final word. Not a prayer, not a curse, not a plea. Liberté, freedom, then silence. After the war, Noor Inayat Khan was awarded the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian honor for gallantry. France gave her the Croix de Guerre with Gold Star. Her name was added to monuments, her story preserved in archives. But no medal could explain the truth. History had to do that. Decades later, declassified documents revealed what Noor never knew. Her transmissions had mattered. Intelligence she'd sent had reached Allied command despite London's doubts. Supply drops were rerouted, operations adjusted, German logistics disrupted across northern France. Her silence after capture had saved agents from walking into traps. Her refusal to transmit had prevented dozens of deaths. And Paris, occupied, bleeding, suffocating Paris, had never gone completely dark. Because one woman with a wireless set and a Sufi prayer had refused to let it. She'd transmitted when no one was listening. She'd stayed when leaving meant survival. She'd chosen silence over betrayal. She'd sacrificed everything so strangers might live. And long after the radios stopped crackling, long after the war ended, long after her name was nearly forgotten, history finally listened back. Noor Inayat Khan, the woman who became a ghost to keep Paris alive, the spy who saved lives she never met, the voice that refused to be silenced. She existed. History heard her. And now, so have you. So here's the question Noor's story forces us to ask. What would you do if helping others meant certain death? If staying meant torture, but leaving meant abandoning people who needed you? Noor answered that question with her life. And she's not alone. History is full of people who made that same impossible choice, who chose duty over survival, strangers over safety, silence over betrayal. If you want to meet more of them, subscribe to this channel right now, because we're going to keep finding these stories, the ones that make you question what you're capable of, the ones that prove ordinary people can be extraordinary. Click the video on your screen next. Another impossible choice, another person who refused to quit, another story you won't forget. Thanks for watching. And remember, Noor died thinking she'd failed. She was wrong. Don't let her story be forgotten.